So,
Okay.
welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our third AKO Zoom session. So today I just want to introduce you to one of our fantastic patrons, Jo Luck, who's been with, God, she's just amazing. I just can't tell you how brilliant she is. She's yeah, at a distance, she's a bit of a kickboxer, so you have to be careful. So I just wanted to welcome also Anna. Thank you, Anna. So if you just wanted to say a few words about and welcome Jo, and then what we're going to do is mute everybody, and then Jo will be taking questions right at the end. But please do put questions in the chat, just so that you don't forget them, and then I can put them to Jo later on, and I'll unmute you so you can chat directly with Jo, but not during her session. She'd like just to go from A to Z and just finish her whole session before she takes questions. Emma?
Okay, good morning everyone. I'm sitting outside today because my husband's working inside. He's got a conference call. So we've been so lucky with the weather. It's beautiful today. Thank you so much for joining us all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anna Kennedy. I've got 2 sons on the spectrum, and obviously Anna Kennedy Online now has been going since 2009. Just wanted to remind you of a few things that are happening. Obviously, we're having different workshops because of the times. We're trying to do what we can as a charity. We've still got people, parents, carers, professionals that are messaging the charity. Only last night we were talking to a family at 11 o'clock in the evening. So as you know, autism doesn't sleep, and we are still going. We've got, which is the fun thing to do. We're in our 9th year. The first year we got UNESCO patronage for it. So if you would like to join in, please get on your dancing shoes. So it's either a photo or a video. Tag me on social media. So Anna Kennedy on Facebook, at Anna Kennedy 1 on Twitter, and at Anna Kennedy OBE on Instagram. And we will be looking, myself from Born Anxious, Kelly and myself, we'll be looking at the best videos. So you can win a Be Kind bag or one of the t-shirts from the range. So check it out on the charity website, www.annakennedyonline.com, and you could win yourself a t-shirt or a Be Kind bag, and they're really lovely and really well made. Just to remind you that for people that need to go out walking, you can go out more than once a week. Not once a week, once a day, thank God, because obviously Angela and I, we do like walking, so you can go out 3 times a day. So obviously that's a great stress buster from everyone. And also just to remind you about the Autism Hero Awards. Hopefully it will be going on in November. Closing date is the 1st week of September. So if you know somebody that goes the extra mile, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a professional, whether it's a carer, whether it's a parent, please nominate them. There's 12 different categories. So check out the charity website on the events page. It's Autism Hero Awards, closing date 1st week in September. So Jo Luck, she's been with us for such a long time, such a fantastic person. We've given talks together, we've spoken at the House of Commons, we've spoken in schools, she's presented Autism's Got Talent performers, and today she's going to be talking about a dual diagnosis. So she's going to be explaining the features and how it's manifested itself within Jo, and she's going to be talking about her lived-in experience. So over to you, Jo. Thank you very much. And Oscar, obviously, in the background. She's a lovely dog.
Well, Oscar's in the room, so I think he's bored already.
I think about the room. It's boring already for him.
So, yeah, my name's Jo Luck. I'm 33 years old. I'm a patron of Anna Kennedy Online. So this is kind of my first time doing one of these types of presentations sort of on a platform like this. So anything could happen. And I've had to I've gone from basically from an idea last week to a presentation made over a day. So it's created in true ADHD style, as in I finished it this morning. So I've structured my section, so I know what I'm kind of saying, and normally I have it all word for word so that I don't go off on tangents much. But today I'm kind of so experimentally. So I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome in 2010 at the age of 23, and with ADHD in 2014 at the age of 28. So there was a bit of a gap in between my diagnoses. And today what I'm going to be doing is discussing like what it's like to have a dual diagnosis, and also from the perspective of my own lived experience, and the insights that I've got of living with both conditions, and also what I've kind of learned along the way in dealing with those. So like, I don't know if everyone can hear me okay, because I'm seeing some messages at the bottom. Yeah, so yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Cool, that's it, awesome. So basically I've called this like presentation today Fighting with Lead Boots. So this is an analogy that was used by my psychologist to help me. So after I'd been diagnosed with ADHD, I was kind of struggling a bit with like the way I saw what I'd achieved, and the fact that I wasn't always reaching my potential as such. So I'd started seeing a psychologist privately and sort of paying for it. And his way of helping me to kind of deal with the sort of effects of having ADHD, and like my perception of what I was achieving or not achieving, was to create this formula type thing that we've got. So I'm just going to share this up for everybody. So he created this formula of achievement equals output plus obstacles overcome. So what he was trying to say is that basically, like it says on the visual, most people like judge your achievement by what they see you achieving. So say take for GCSEs, for example, they'll see if you've got an A or a B or a C or whatever the numbers and stuff are now, but they don't always see what you've had to overcome to get there. So those obstacles can be quite important, because the more obstacles you have to overcome, the better that achievement actually is. So it's important to, his message was that it was important to bear in mind that what you've had to overcome to get to where you are, and that even though it might look like less than others or the same as others, it can actually be substantially greater than others, just in view of the some of the obstacles you might have. So one of the things that I was saying was that I'd go in there and was talking about my school years, and I would say, well, you know, I only got 7 Bs. I mean, I only got 7 Bs in my GCSEs, and I hadn't done any revision in the year of my GCSEs, and I hadn't really done a lot of work because I struggled with all of those things, having undiagnosed autism and ADHD. So he is kind of like, well, it goes 7 Bs, you might have expected more of yourself, but you have to remember that you had autism and you had ADHD. So what that means was that basically he came up with this analogy for me of fighting, because obviously with my kickboxing I can relate to those things better and it makes sense to me. So he said to me, Joe, if you were fighting somebody and you had lead boots on and they didn't, and you drew, whose achievement would be the best? So in typical true Joe style, I sort of said, well, that kind of depends, really. It depends on, I'm quite a good fighter. If they're a beginner and I still draw, that means I was rubbish. So he was like, okay, right, we'll look at this again. If you're fighting somebody who's got the same experience as you, the same skills as you, is basically kind of like a cloned version of you in fighting, and you're wearing lead boots and they aren't, and you draw, whose is the greatest achievement? So I sat there and I was like, well, like me, I guess. Obviously I didn't really, I was kind of begrudgingly admitting this because I didn't want to admit he was right, that actually having these conditions actually have impacted on what I'm able to achieve. So actually the fact that I got through school and I got 7 Bs with no revision and very little work and no support for my conditions, no additional adaptations made for me in exams or anything like that, like, actually that's pretty good. And you know, what could I have done if I'd had all those supports and things in place? So that analogy was really important for me, because it's kind of stuck with me through the last like 4 or 5 years, in that every time I'm going, well, that's not that much, everyone can do that. Like my friends or my psychologist always go, remember the lead boots, Joe, remember the lead boots. So it's my way of like a prompt, so that I'll kind of keep perspective of what I'm doing and I'm not just discrediting it all the time, because it's really disheartening enough to struggle with some things, let alone when you do achieve stuff and when you do get things done, to then go, actually other people do that so much easier, so it's nothing. Because an achievement is an achievement regardless of what it is. It's very subjective and personal to you. So obviously there was a bit of time in between my diagnoses. So I was diagnosed with Asperger's back in 2010. I was diagnosed because I'd been having a lot of struggles that they'd been getting the harder the more I grew up. The more responsibilities were coming onto me, like it was hard to kind of to hide it and cope with it. There's somebody else still struggling with the sounds, so I'll just adjust and see if it's up. I always worry, Tally, I always worry. So basically I've been having a lot of struggles, and that's what led to my diagnosis. It wasn't just some Joe sitting there thinking, oh yeah, like perhaps that would be a fun thing to do, because it's not. There are a lot of things, and I started thinking that, you know, like I'm struggling with all this stuff. Why am I struggling? Why am I different? Why am I a freak, basically? Why am I so, like, you know, is there something, what's wrong with me? So I basically kind of got diagnosed, and from there I thought I had the answers. So I got my diagnosis of Asperger's. I thought, yes, great, got the answers to what's going on. I know what my struggles are. Like I can put things in place now. I can make stuff better. I can get on with my life, and things will be easier. So I kind of felt like quite relieved about this diagnosis. It meant that there wasn't something like specifically like wrong with me. It was just a different way of being. But I was like sort of hopeful about like what I could now go on to achieve. I was excited that I could probably get my life on track, and that, like, you know, I could start doing some of the things I really wanted to do. It kind of freed me from like being kept in by all this horrible feelings. So it led to a lot of learning, a lot of self-analysis and all that kind of stuff. I would have follow-up sessions, learn strategies, and I thought, you know, life will be easier. However, what actually happened was that things didn't get easier. The strategies weren't working. Nobody knew why. I had support from workers at National Autistic Society. They were putting in things, and like the strategies that what they were putting in weren't working, and they were like very baffled by this. And things actually got worse, because if you think about suddenly getting this hope that things are going to get better and you're going to be able to cope with things, and then actually they can't and you can't, you start feeling worse about things, because it starts making you think, well, what is it about me? So there's like a discrepancy between my expectation of what was going to happen and then the reality of what happened. So this hurt me a lot, this discrepancy, like thinking that I was going to get on things and then not being able to, made me become really quite frustrated, angry, low in mood. I felt stuck, like I was a failure, and it was like a problem with me. I thought there's something that's not okay with me. Why is this so hard? I felt like I was like unhelpful. I tried making timetables and structures and following them, and I followed them for a while, and then it would all fail and break apart. I couldn't judge time. So when I was making these plans, I was trying to do a month's worth of stuff in an afternoon, and then wondering why I was failing at getting all my stuff done. But really, I just didn't have all of the answers to what was going on. So I was referred back to the ADHD and Asperger's team here, and eventually was diagnosed with ADHD. So that started to make things make a lot more sense, because actually it wasn't just a presentation of autism. So I knew that learning about ADHD was going to be an important thing to do, as I'd done with learning about autism. But after the experience of like getting the answers of autism and then hoping and learning about autism, I struggled. I didn't know if I was going to have the capacity to sit and learn all this stuff, and then for it all to happen again, like for all of these things to be put in place and for it not to work. So I was kind of a bit hesitant and reluctant about doing that again and putting myself out there in that kind of way and letting myself have those kind of hopes. So it has been more of a slow process since my ADHD diagnosis. So I kind of turned on to looking for information. There's lots about ADHD, and not so much on having a dual diagnosis. And I wanted to really find information about having a dual diagnosis, because I didn't want to just have strategies for one or the other that might not work so well for both, or that were only effective in one condition. So I find it quite strange that there wasn't so much information about like having both, because having autism actually makes it more likely to have the possibility of having ADHD. So it's not uncommon that you find that quite a lot of people with autism can have a dual diagnosis with ADHD and also with other conditions. So I don't know if there's anybody who wants to ask any questions about what it was like in the time between diagnosis. I think I'll try and do some questions at the end of each section. So if there's anybody who has any questions about anything about having that space, then let me know.
I mean, if you can just post your questions in the chat, then I can pass them on to Joe. So let me know. So I don't think there's anything at the moment, Joe, so you can carry on.
And also, if people have questions and you've left for the end, or I can sort of reply to those by email if you want me to. So if you haven't answered them, I can get those answers to you.
Okay, so Chris has put something up. So Chris, if you unmute yourself just for a second, you can have a very quick chat with Joe. And if we need to go, if Joe wants to answer that one at the end, she'll let you know. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. Hi, Joe. No, it was just, I mean, what sort of specifically would you have liked to have seen
in school?
I mean, this is what we're trying to do, support people like you. But, you know,
so
I'm
Chris,
struggling to find out.
Could you introduce yourself, Chris, so people know who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, sorry. I'm Chris Richards. I'm the CEO of a local Leicester charity finding either employment, engagement or volunteering for autistic adults, usually sort of 23 plus, because by the time there's usually support up to 23, but after 23 there tends to be this dirty great big black hole.
So are you asking about
what would you have liked to have seen
in school or just in general?
Both school and afterwards, sort of I don't know, employment advice, careers advice, directional advice.
Yeah. Okay. So there was a lot of issues with the school stuff. I think it would have been really useful in school for me to obviously have had a diagnosis. If I'd have had that, I would have liked to have had some opportunities to learn the things that could help me more. I think a lot of times in schools, people kind of tend to jump into more teaching strategies than teaching about your conditions. And actually, I've found that it's been that psychoeducation almost that's actually been the thing that's helped me the most, because by understanding myself, my conditions and how I work best has meant that I've been able to problem solve more effectively and find the solutions to my problems. So basically what's helped me like in the last few years as an adult, and that I'd have liked to have been able to do a lot earlier, has been working collaboratively with somebody who understands my conditions and helps me to understand them, and then that enables me then to work with them to think about how I work best. It puts more onus on me, because I think when you give kids strategy, sometimes it tends to be prescriptive, like, here you go, here's your strategy, go and do that, with no explanation behind it of why you're doing it and what you're trying to achieve. So how do you then transfer that into other areas of life? If you're teaching people like how to make those kind of things for themselves and those theories, you actually give them a skill of being able to problem solve and work out what they will need and preempt that. So I think those things were useful. I think it was kind of being able to be easier on myself and not so hard on myself about what I struggled with would have been helpful. Helped me structure my learning, my revision, and methods to keep myself on those things. Because as I went into my book, was thought, okay, so I've got to revise for these exams. What do I do? Go back to the start of the book, try and go through the whole year's, like, couple of years worth of learning, like, in order. That was I couldn't structure it in any other way. So I don't know if that's kind of answered your question, but I can also, like, after this is finished, like, put more things down, and I've got a section coming up on strategies and stuff as well, so that might answer more of that.
That was a very good answer. Thank you very much. Did help.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that question. I've also got a question from Kim Richardson. So, Kim, if you want to unmute yourself, or I can unmute you. Yeah. Hi, Kim. You're free to chat.
Hi, Jo. I just wondered, I can imagine it being quite soul-destroying at that changeover period, not having or only having strategies or support for just the Asperger's and not the ADHD. So do you now kind of try something that's sort of like meant to be to help with the Asperger's, and if that fails, then try something for the ADHD? Or how do you work out which ones are going to work for you? Is it a bit of trial and error like that? Because I can imagine that being quite soul destroying as well.
Yeah. It is very destroying, and it's also very unpredictable. Like, one day something works, another day it doesn't. So right. I'm happy to, like, be understanding that I need to go with the flow. It goes against all of the autism stuff completely, because you want to do the same thing all the time. So being able to learn that that's what I need and that's okay, and that has been quite helpful. But basically, I think I find sometimes that the autism is easier to predict. I have a better understanding of that. The ADHD thing that makes it unpredictable, and it's I kind of more ADHD strategies are easier to adapt into the autism stuff, and I probably find I follow some of the autism strategies because of the ADHD and vice versa. So is a lot of trial and error, and it's a lot of, like, collaborative, like, brainstorming, coming up with different ideas and things, and trying it and seeing how it goes. One of the things that I always find is that I end up with too many things all trying to do, like, too many strategies all at once. Like, if I'm keeping organisation and structure, I will be basically having, like, a weekly planner there, a monthly planner there, a daily planner there, and try and have to coordinate it all, and that becomes too onerous. So it's trying to like give me enough there, but also mean that I can still maintain it. So I hope that's answered.
Yeah.
I'll be talking about some of the concepts of both like a bit later on as well. So
okay, I just wanted to say thank you so much for that, Kim. I just wanted to say I think I've sort of sussed out why we're getting a bit of problems with the sound. If I have more than one person unmuted, it starts to go funny, and as soon as I get the other person muted, you sound a lot better, Joe. So after you've asked your question, I might mute you again while Joe is answering, just so that we can hear what she's saying. So I think that's about it. Bobby says, what did you think of school before finding out?
well, yeah, what did I think of school? So at school, I wasn't like your typical like challenging behaviours coming out kind of kid. I was the kind of internalized withdrawn kid, which is how I kind of flew under the radar at school. Basically, like school was quite frustrating. I was one of those kids who wanted to get on and do well, but it was stuff like homework and meeting those deadlines that I kind of found really hard. With school and stuff like that, it was trying to fit in. There's so many challenges. It is so unseen. People didn't realise the extent of challenges that I was having, because I just presented as this really quiet, studious child, and there was no problems with me academically, and I was just like looked upon as being shy. But actually, there was quite a lot of things going on underneath. I think Oscar's crying, trying to join in. Oscar, please be quiet.
Okay, I think that's it for the question. So I think that it seems to be working. So Wendy is saying, I totally get that. I was diagnosed at the same age as you, and my whole life is starting to make sense, old and new. So that's just from Wendy. So what I'll do is, if you can carry on, Joe,
yeah.
And we'll take more questions later. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more now about ADHD specifically, because I think I'm working on the premise that people have got more understanding of kind of the autism side of things, given that, you know, we've come through the AKO charity. And so I thought I'd try and explain a bit more about how ADHD works and stuff. So ADHD is kind of a combination of poor inhibition, poor self-control, and problems with executive functioning. So these problems all interrelate and they can exacerbate each other. There are symptoms of hyperactivity and inattention, and like all the traits that are around those particular symptoms can be found in like the diagnostic manual thing. So I'm not going to go over like the really hardcore, like breaking it down into like diagnostic terms, because it might get a bit boring. So it basically means you kind of have three presentations within ADHD, which are of inattention, hyperactivity, and then the more common profile of combined inattention and hyperactivity. So one of the things I wanted to kind of address about that was that with hyperactivity, it's not just that kind of being able to bounce off the walls, like, you know, you get that stereotypical child bouncing around the walls, pretending to be a cat, like I was the other day, like, you know, just really unable to sit still. That hyperactivity can also be quite internalized. So as a kid, nobody would ever have thought Joe's a hyperactive kid, because I didn't exhibit things in that way. But actually inside, the hyperactivity was there. That was in how much my thoughts were racing, how restless I'd become quickly, and how my attention would flip from thing to thing. So hyperactivity is not just that external presentation, there's also an internal presentation, which is something that's quite important to be aware of. So chemically within ADHD, what's happening is that it's to do around a neurotransmitter called dopamine. So and people who have ADHD tend to have issues in how the amounts of dopamine is in their brain. So dopamine is sent in like as a signal to different parts of your brain, and this activates them into doing specific actions. And it's largely to do with it has a major role in motivation and reward-based actions. So dopamine makes you want more of things. So you find if you get text messages or you're on social media and you're getting notification all the times, they give you a little hit of dopamine. So this is why sometimes people with ADHD are more susceptible to falling into those kind of activities and getting really stuck, because they're already either having too little dopamine being produced in their brain, or the dopamine that's in their brain is not being transmitted and transported to areas in their brain as well as it should be. So these are the things that can induce those dopamine hits, can lead you down a path of losing time and losing track of what's going on. So medication, for example, is very helpful with this, because it can help that either create more dopamine, or it can help that dopamine get to the right places it needs to. So I think of it as like with transmitting it, I think of it like, with when you've got train tracks and you have to change the direction, so you have a switch so that the track moves on to the other track. It's kind of like that, but you're not being able to switch it over to the track you need it to. So rather than being able to carry on your journey, you're going off on a dead end. That's how I kind of try and visualize it. So poor inhibition kind of basically means you've got trouble stopping yourself from doing things, and stopping yourself for long enough to think about what you need to do. Without this, you can struggle to use self-control. So symptoms of that kind of will include difficulties with waiting, difficulties stopping behaviour, making impulsive decisions about things. Having poor self-control is basically any response you kind of direct at yourself that would lead you to do something different. So you have your inhibition, which is your pause. So say, for example, somebody says something that you don't like, and there's somebody that's in a position of authority. If you don't have, if you have poor inhibition, you're likely to immediately jump in and say something you probably shouldn't. What inhibition gives you is a chance to go, wait a second, let's evaluate this, and now let's do something else. So inhibition is that bit that makes you wait. The self-control is the bit that makes you go, okay, perhaps saying this is going to get me in trouble. Maybe I can rephrase it as like that. That's what your self-control is. It's that being able to choose a different thing from your first impulse reaction. So you can see automatically how they work together, inhibition and self-control. Then there's also executive functioning. So I'm just going to share something about this. So this is from Russell Barkley's model of ADHD, and the four boxes in the middle are kind of the executive functioning elements that I'm going to talk about. So executive functions kind of operate together, but they can also impair you separately. ADHD is basically delaying the development, or it kind of leads to delayed development of these executive functioning areas. So see at the top you've got behavioural inhibition, about what we've just spoken about, and this then leads on to that this is like the bit in between where you make that decision of what to do next. So it's in between that control bit, you have these executive functions. So we're looking at non-verbal working memory, this internalisation of speech, which is verbal working memory, emotional regulation, which on here is as self-regulation, and then the fourth one is about planning and problem solving, has been put as reconstitution. So non-verbal working memory is basically the capacity to hold on to information in your mind. So it's seeing images in your mind about what's happened. So it's that thing where, like, if you see somebody's face is sad, you can recall, oh yeah, I've seen that face before. That means someone's, like, it's kind of been able to recognize that. So it's often referred to as your mind's eye. It helps us to see the consequences of actions and to gain self-awareness. So ADHD can make this more difficult, or where you have some impairments of ADHD is that you can have more difficulties in recalling and reactivating past events to remember what happened. So you kind of don't learn as such from things that you've experienced, because you're impaired in what you can immediately recall and bring up. It also sort of makes it more difficult to remember and recall long, complicated sequences of behaviours. That's in learning tasks. So you're having difficulties to remember what's happened and what you've learned. Learning from the mistakes of others. So often if you see somebody doing something and it had a poor outcome for them, you can see that that's happened and modify what you do. People with ADHD struggle with that because of difficulties with non-verbal working memory. It means you can have little concept of the future. And there's also like this thing about difficulty sharing things with others, because in the present moment, all you can see is the fact that you're losing some of what you've got by sharing it, rather than seeing that actually in the future, sharing now can mean somebody shares back with you. So the verbal working memory is known as the mind's voice. So this is your ability to kind of talk to yourself. This allows us to describe and contemplate a situation that's going on, and it puts words to the images. So you have the images flag up in your head. The verbal working memory then puts words to those things and gives it some kind of context. So this is kind of crucial for like problem solving, in being able to weigh up pros and cons of things, and in retaining information that we've read. So it helps with also with reasoning about like what's right and what's wrong. So ADHD can affect this in the sense that we don't use the self-talk to control yourself or to solve a problem. You tend to jump to conclusions, to get quite defensive and attack the problem. You let the event or the situation that's going on rule what you're going to do next. So you're kind of at the mercy of the moment. So what's going on, you tend to just be very into that rather than considering what you do. It can make you really vulnerable to the influence of others, because if you haven't got that in your brain thinking about, okay, so what happened last time? Is this right or wrong? Should I do this? Should I do that? If someone suggests something, you're going to immediately go, oh, that would be a cool thing to do. So how many people know that ADHD kid where the ADHD kid has been the one that gets in trouble because the other kids have gone, go and do this thing. And because they don't have the ability to that stop, pause and reflect and think about what they're going to do, just go ahead and do it, and then end up being the one that gets in trouble. So this also can make it difficult to make plans. You either find that you're following certain rules very rigidly or not at all, and missing out on mental connections between things, which means that it leaves you not understanding everything like fully. So the emotional regulation, which is the next one of self-regulation of affect, motivation and arousal, that's known as the mind's heart. So emotions are powerful motivators. So I think a lot of us are always often kind of driven by what emotions we've got and what we want to do. So having a lack of control over your emotions basically equals having a lack of control over what we do. Working memory is instrumental in regulating emotional response. So you can see then if you have deficits and impairments within your non-verbal and verbal working memories, you're going to have a lot of difficulties in being able to regulate your emotions. It means that having emotional regulation means that you can control your urge to act, you can avoid bad choices, motivate yourself, express yourself in a more appropriate way, soothe yourself. I kind of look at emotional regulation as like the safety mechanism on a gun. So it's stopping you from shooting, firing off at somebody. So people with ADHD are often missing the safety of the gun. So they're going to have more instant emotional reactions. It makes them more emotionally impulsive. Some of those reactions can be very disproportionate to what's happened, the situation. And this can lead to kind of a social rejection in, well, why are you kicking off about that thing? Or why are you getting so upset about that for? Like, it's an understanding, your peers don't understand some of those responses. And it can make it very hard to stick out at tasks because you don't always have that emotional connection. You get quite bored easily. So the last one on this is about the planning and problem solving. So they call this the mind's playground, which I just think is a bit silly, but there we go. So the working memory will enable us to put like things into order, different orders, and to form ideas and plans. So it's enabling you to kind of switch around some of the thoughts that you have to see if they work better in a different way, or what things are important to do to complete a task. So this ability can help us to consider what options we have, and planning is basically a way of generating multiple options and being able to decide on the best form of action. So those with ADHD will find it difficult to think on their feet. The working memory already makes it difficult to hold a lot of information in your brain about previous things that have happened. But having this lack of problem solving can mean that you're enabled to reorganize that information into a plan. So that can then lead to having trouble getting organised, staying organised, and sequencing what you need to do. So problem solving and planning is pretty central to a lot of things that you need to do in life. And deficits within this area can make you feel quite inadequate and stupid. But it's important to remember that this isn't anything to do with your intelligence. This is due to ADHD. So ADHD can lead to a lot of problems with self-management in organising your behaviour over time to prepare for the future. So there's examples of this are like procrastinating, having a poor sense of time, being late for stuff, trouble planning ahead, different difficulties in prioritising and judging time, and starting and sticking to tasks. So you can see why, for me, like putting all this together can be quite a challenge, because I struggle with my time management and stuff. There's also problems with things like organising yourself. So this is in organising your thoughts and actions in a quick enough and effective enough way to overcome obstacles and to meet the things you need to do. So this is where like you can be at a loss for words when you're trying to explain things, which is one of the reasons why I like to plan out things I'm saying word for word, because I know sometimes I can struggle to find the right words. You can be slower to react to things, oppositional to activities which require more mental thought and focus, and it can be difficult putting your thoughts and stuff into writing. There'll be obviously difficulties with self-discipline or inhibition. This can be around behaviour, thoughts and emotions. So this would be like your difficulties in waiting, stopping and changing behaviours, being more accident prone, making impulsive decisions and not considering the consequences. There's also challenges around motivating yourself. And if you can't motivate yourself, how are you able to persist and complete something? So examples of this would be taking more shortcuts, like poor attention to detail, depending on others to help you with things a lot more, like getting silly and messing around. It means that you can be quite inconsistent in the quality and quantity of things that you produce. And another area is also in problems in activating and yourself into doing what you need to do. So that's in concentrating, being alert, and can be problems with difficulties staying awake, alert and activated to sustain concentration when things are quite boring or there's no immediate like payoff. So this can mean you're easily distracted, you're a bit of a daydreamer, you get bored more easy, and you can't sustain that concentration. So if you look at all of these things together, I think it's quite clear that ADHD is often quite misunderstood and underestimated. And really it does cause impairments in every domain of your life. And through those issues and problems, you can see how it's not just in your education and your work, it's also within your relationships and managing your health needs, managing your hygiene and that kind of stuff. So for me, like, having ADHD it's like a fear. I have a fear of failing every day. I can guarantee that I'm going to fail at something. Like, I'm not either going to do what I need to do or to like be where I need to be at the right time. There's something that I'm always going to fail at, and that is really, really frustrating and very, very disheartening. No matter how hard you try, you know something's not going to work out the way you intend it to. And this can lead to developing low self-esteem. There's also like anxiety that can develop around these things, because you're kind of not knowing how you're going to perform or if you're going to perform. So it creates an uncertainty. You know, can you imagine if you woke up every day and you know you're really good at something and you understand your maths or something, but you don't know if you're going to be able to complete that activity, and how difficult that is, if you can try and imagine that. So you, for example, can have a kid who has ADHD and they know how to spell, and they know how to, and they know grammar rules, for example, and they start to like do an activity on a timed essay in English. And even though they know all the spellings, they know all the grammar rules, because they're focusing on the question and can't divide that attention between both things, their teacher comes back with the marked result of their work, and there's so many spelling errors and grammar errors, and the teacher then assumes that they don't understand these things, but actually they do. It's just the fact that in that moment their focus has gone not from thinking of how to spell, it's gone on to that question, because they can't divide that with what they've got. They've had to put everything into one thing just to get it done. So it can create a lot of anxiety and make you feel quite resentful of doing schoolwork, because you think, am I going to get in trouble? People are going to think that I'm stupid. And it also can cause like the social difficulties. And another thing that I always find hard about having ADHD is the perception of other people. You have a perception of others that you're lazy or you're stupid, and you're worrying that you'll be seen in this way. And there's also this belief that people have that everybody has symptoms of ADHD, and this is just not true. The differences are that, like, it's the frequency of how often you can't concentrate and sit down and do stuff, and it's that impact on your life and emotions. For other people, like, sometimes struggling with their concentration or struggling to get themselves going and motivated doesn't make you break down emotionally. It doesn't make you think that your life's not worth living. You don't end up in a heap on the floor in a flood of tears because you're not concentrating. That's more how people with ADHD can experience it. So I'm just at the end of the section on ADHD. So, like, I can do a couple of questions now, but I don't want to like spend too much time on that because I'll overrun. So
I don't think there's any questions. Does anyone ever have any questions? I I know, Alice, I know you've got loads that you'd like to say. So I don't know, do you want to have a quick word with Jo now? You can unmute yourself, but just a quick one, because as Jo was saying, we don't have much time and we need to finish. Hi, Alice. Hi.
Hi. Sorry, I missed the first bit. So I just wanted to clarify, what age were you when signs showed of anything, of anybody flagging up anything? Because my son's completely different.
So I was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 23, and I was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 28. So
my son was diagnosed at well, he was showing signs from 3 and was diagnosed with the ADHD by the time he was 5, and I was actually resistant to diagnosis because of the deficit side of it. I wouldn't even look it up. I was like, he hasn't got attention deficit because he concentrates. So it's completely the other way round, and it's really interesting hearing from somebody who's looked at it as an adult, because I think I sort of went to looking more at the autism side of things as the autism became more predominant with him, and so didn't look again so much at the ADHD. And a lot of the things you're saying is like, I get confused about his, like what you were just saying about memory. I get confused about how he can have an absolutely fantastic memory for detail of like the video game or the TV program, but can't remember that 2 seconds ago I told him to. I know he, you know, the concentration flips, but like, you've done this a million times, why can't you do it, sort of thing. And it's just like, it's a lot of explanation that you've just done of that side. I think, it's really interesting.
That's in like the difference between memory of like facts and statistics and academic information, and the difference between like the working memory, which is your memory for with what's coming in to help you function. So that's where the difference is. Then you also can have like difficulties remembering social information, so you can have your social memory. So that also can be like, so he's
really struggling.
I remember people's phone numbers and stuff like that. I so much detail about stuff, but then I would get really frustrated with myself because I would forget in the moment how to do this, or what strategy I should use, or what my instruction was.
Like learning to use the coffee machine took years. But what he's really struggling with now, and that's very interesting, is that because he's not got his one-to-one and he's not at college, he's saying he can't work out the structure of anything. And I was like, and I'm like, well, your tutors are there, but I think he's really, really struggling now at home. He also hasn't got a laptop that's suitable for a lot of the work. We're waiting for a new one. But yeah, that really makes sense, because at college he has a one-to-one, and also he's found it harder at college from the specialist school with the support. It is interesting. Sorry, there's so many things that are coming into my head.
Making that structure for yourself is very, very difficult.
He's been saying that.
I help like with my structure for the week, and it is literally the thing that I hate the most. On a bad day, I'll literally walk out the room and like try and avoid it. So she'll take the board and follow me around the house. I'll be sitting there talking about some like sort of like some weird stuff because I'm stressed, and she'll just be trying to do it for me. So it's really important, but it's really hard to do. So I think it's kind of trying to work out what needs to happen, and it's someone needs to sit there and help you with doing that. And it's again, later on I'm sharing some of the strategies that I use, so I kind of will cover sort of how I make plans and stuff, so that might be helpful there. So
he says he's not sure how to structure himself at the moment, and it's not making clear what he needs to structure, so I need to sit down with him, I think.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. We're running out of time, but I've got a comment from Robbie Peterson, and he's saying, I have both diagnosed Asperger's and ADHD. I have many similar issues to you with time management, organization, distraction, procrastination, motivation, and often knowing I shall fail. However, is there not an overlap with ADHD and Asperger's so that some of these issues are shared by both conditions? However, I have found that later in my career life, I had to have some very bad experiences to start learning to try to not make the same mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so he's saying, are there any overlaps? He was saying, however, is there not an overlap with ADHD and Asperger's so that some of these issues are shared with both conditions?
Yeah, there are quite a few overlaps, which also makes going through diagnostic processes, if you've got one or the other, it can be quite difficult, because you're kind of trying to determine if that's just an amount of this or if it's a significant amount, which also indicates there's an additional diagnosis. So there are a lot of overlaps in certain things, but there are a lot of things that work differently and can cause some conflict, which again is something that I'm talking about in a bit later on. So shall I move on to the next section now?
Thanks, Jo.
So if I'm going to go back kind of onto like the work that I've done with my psychologist, and another thing that I found really kind of important was that he explained a model and a theory to me called the triune brain model. So at this time I was always quite hard on myself about what I couldn't cope with and what I was struggling to do. So having this explained was quite important to me. So the triune brain model is a theory, and it kind of reconciles Darwin's theory of evolution with Freud's model of the mind, and it helps those kind of theories make sense, working as a whole kind of thing. So within the brain there are many structures, and I'm going to kind of keep it quite simple and break it down into like three areas, and not the sort of like this area has all of these things, because I don't want to weigh it down too much. So all these different areas of your brains have like different functions. So I'm just going to show up another picture now. So you've got these three areas here: the neocortex, the limbic brain, and the reptilian brain. So here's another one. Also here it's called the lizard brain. So the reptilian brain, which is also known as the R complex, is something that's sort of like all like reptiles will have. It's the primitive part of your brain, and this deals with your basic bodily functions to keep you alive and survive. So it's like your automatic responses. The limbic system, which is known as the emotional brain, is found in like all mammals. This is responsible for your complex emotions and consolidation of your long-term memory, and will trigger off your fight and flight response. The neocortex, which is the third part, which is known as the thinking brain or the human brain. This is responsible for higher cognitive functioning, for logical and abstract thinking and rationalising. It's quite an important part of your brain. So most of the time you kind of tend to be in that neocortex section, your thinking brain, and you're using that to deal with what's coming in at you, what activities you've got, learning. So everything you kind of try and stay in there. But there are times where that limbic system, or like you're going to your fight and flight in reptilian brain as well. So we've all experienced something that's called emotional hijacking. So this is where you're going out. Say we'll take driving for example. We've all had that moment where we're on the road and we're driving, and some idiot like comes up next to us, cuts us up, or tailgates us, or just basically is a general idiot on the road. And it's really hard to stay calm, because it's when that happens it is a threat, because you could crash your car because of the idiocy. So you tend to have an emotional response to that and get quite angry. You might gesture to the other driver, you might shout swear words, you might beep your horn at them, and these responses all are part of emotional hijacking. So this is the premise that when you're stressed, your thinking brain starts to have less influence on what you're doing. So your emotional brain starts to hijack the responses you make. It kind of takes over. It's designed to try and keep you safe. So how this happens is through the amygdala. So the amygdala, which is part of your limbic system, and the hypothalamus, they scan and assess for perceived threats in your environment. The important words here are on perceived threats. So when it detects something that it thinks is a threat, it sends an alert out, which is significantly kind of amplified, and it overrides the thinking brain. So the signals get sent straight to those rather than through your neocortex. So you're not having a chance to rationalize and reason that before you act. So I kind of liken it to a, like if you think about if you live somewhere where you get a lot of floods and you've got like the flood warning siren, or you've got like a like bomb alerts from having like in the war times, but like there was an air raid come in, so you have that siren sound out. I kind of think of it like that. So it sees this threat, sets off this big siren, and it bypasses your rational thought. So the purpose of why it does this is it's doing this to protect you. Years and years ago, like there were a lot more threats to our survival, so our brains had this mechanism in place so that we could keep ourselves safe. It leads to your emotional brain taking over and deploying triple F response, your fight, flight, freeze, so that you can keep yourself safe. So these responses are like heightened to things that aren't always necessarily an actual threat, because like as time's gone by, we're still perceiving things that aren't threats as threats. We're a lot more safer than we used to be. So like things that make us feel uncomfortable start to become perceived as a threat rather than it just makes you feel uncomfortable. So this hijacking kind of happens in everybody. It's a universal thing. But it also kind of happens quicker when your brain's taken up with more stress and worries. So let me see if I've got the right one here. So basically, if you have your like brain kind of filled up with more stress and worries, you can see in this blue section you have less space in that brain, like that area of the brain, to cope with anything else that comes in that might be stressful. It's basically kind of the more you have to cope with, the quicker your emotional hijacking is going to happen, because you haven't got as much time to rationalize. I always think that with this, it's like kind of meaning that like you're just kind of overflowing quicker. It's like having things within like a jug. It's like displacing water faster because there's extra things in there. So like those with ADHD and autism, I'm trying to see if I've got the picture for this one. Yeah, those with ADHD and autism, basically the portion of their brain taken up with like the thinking brain is taken up with these challenges as well. So this can mean that there's kind of less space to deal with like these things. So I'm just sorting out another picture. So sorry. So as you can see, if you've got autism, the challenges that are associated with autism already take up a space in your brain, which is leaving you less space to to cope with extra stress anyway. Those who have ADHD will also have that section taken up by ADHD. But if you look and see if you have both autism and ADHD, that space in your brain can very quickly be taken up by, you've already got two quite big blocks happening there taken up by those challenges. So when you start adding other life stresses that you'd normally face, you can see how you've not got a lot of space in there to then deal with anything extra that comes along. So it's understandable why you can often see a lot more challenging behaviours and things outbursts come out quicker over more trivial matters for people who have these additional needs, because they're already coping with so much. So I kind of think that, those who have additional needs, actually their brain's probably working a lot harder and is probably, I'd say, more efficient at dealing with stress, because actually they're in a state where they've always got a level of stress occurring in the brain, and those things that other people might get stressed over more quicker can actually mean that they're getting overwhelmed quicker by less stress than people with autism and ADHD. So you can see actually that if you flip it around, that often, like, you've got people that have got very strong, like, a way of coping with different stresses just because they have additional needs. So I find that quite interesting, and my psychologist kind of explaining this to me really helped me a lot, because it changed my view of the way that I dealt with things. Actually thought, well, actually other people don't have to deal with this much, yet they still get stressed over these things, whereas I'm dealing with all this and I get stressed over that, but actually I probably deal with that stuff better. If you took away that autism and ADHD, I might not be exhibiting the same stress as them, because actually my brain's dealing with it better. And I also explained this to my friend's son, who had a lot of challenging behaviour and he was very down about himself. And when I explained this to him, he said, actually, this means, and he was like, wow, we've got cool brains. That's what he said. So it kind of helped to reframe it in that way. And to try and understand it, and having it drawn like that visually for me by my psychologist to help me to understand why I would get stressed quite quickly, or why those things would happen. So having like the condition separately means there's less space, and combined there's even less space. So you can see how living with both can mean that life is more likely to get more stressful, like, quicker. And another quite important thing is that, like, the constant repeated hijacking of the amygdala can cause it to form new connections, and for these to get stronger. So those new connections are in perceiving threats. So this means that you can get more anxious in general, and what were originally specific anxieties about specific things can then start to extend and expand into other areas of your life, and leave you like with an overwhelming sense of anxiety about everything, really, because you've just got this generalized anxiety occurring in you all the time. If you have autism and ADHD, it's understandable that this might be more likely to happen. So in this sense, your neurology is also putting you at a disadvantage, where you're more likely to get stuck in that amygdala, like forming these new connections, getting stronger, making you more anxious more often. The other thing that my psychologist would mention to me was that autistic people can also tend to have a more sensitive nervous system on top of all of that. So he'd say to me, Jo, your nervous system is very, very sensitive. When it will start noticing threats, and then it will signal things, and your brain will then notice your body's changing. So your brain will then amplify that, which will make your body increase, which will make your brain increase, and you get round in this circle where you're just getting more and more stressed by like internal sensations. So I guess for people with autism and with ADHD, there are more threats that they perceive. You've got more sensory challenges, which can be perceived as threats if it's too loud, too bright, etc. You've also got difficulties processing information, and that onslaught of too much information that's difficult to handle. So that can then be perceived as threats. So things that aren't necessarily perceived as threats to other people can actually be perceived as threats for those people, which mean that your nervous system is more sensitive. Oscar, stop licking me, sorry. So your nervous system is made up of like the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So your sympathetic nervous system is like your nervousness, your anxiety, excitement, anything that kind of makes you go. Your parasympathetic nervous system is the more relaxing side of things, and it's the stuff that makes you calm. So it's kind of like the brakes and accelerator in a car. You need both of them, but you can't deploy them both at the same time because you won't go anywhere. And it also is like the brakes and accelerator in terms that it makes you stop and go. So if you're constantly in your sympathetic nervous system, you can find it more difficult to actually switch into the parasympathetic nervous system because it's got stronger by being in there so often. So those with autism will often have difficulties in transitioning between activities, tasks, places, etc. But they also have difficulties transitioning between emotional states. And this isn't just in the sense of what they feel, but also internal states and physiological changes, and transitioning between them can be difficult. So that means that not changing emotional states can make it harder to move between your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. And so you tend to then stay in one and not activate the other one. So that means you kind of get like, it's like if you don't use your muscles, they start to like decline and deteriorate. So your use of that is reducing. The transition issues also mean that you can find it difficult to switch between the two because of difficulties transitioning. So that's also a physiological level. I think people always remember changes in environment, activities, like the big stuff. They don't always remember the change in how you feel. So for me, when I get relaxed, it's stressful because I'm not used to it. It's a change. When I start medication, it's stressful because it's an internal change. So it's being aware of those feelings of different. I find it hard at weekends and weekdays because weekdays feel different to weekend days. So that makes me stressed because that's another change in transition. So it's on a much more like in-depth level than what you kind of think it is. So staying in that sympathetic nervous system will then also cause your amygdala to strengthen in making those connections of perceiving threats. So that can show just how much more difficult it can be for somebody who's autistic to manage their anxiety because they're naturally kind of hardwired to almost stay in one state. And that often is more likely to be the higher anxious state because it's more available to them in terms of perceiving threats and stuff. So it's not just your neurology that's also going to put you at disadvantage, but it's also the world that we live in, creating these perceived threats and things that we find difficult. Is facilitating you staying there. So that's the end of the brain section. So if there's any questions specifically about what we've just discussed about like how the systems work together and stuff, then I can do like maybe one or two now. But again, still got
Joe. I can't see any questions. If anyone's got a question, can they let me know? They want to put their hand up. No, I can't see anything, just chatter, but not a question. Hold on for Joe. This is Robbie Peterson again. When When one also has high anxiety and depression, I assume then that the brain must be swamped with stress and no ability to make rational decisions. Oops, this flicked up. This is where I fear at times when I have bad thoughts or self-harm and not wanting to be here anymore. Am I correct in my assumptions that this is a problem that for others too?
Yeah, that's exactly with being on top with the stress and not being able to make the rational decisions. That is basically like how it is being anxious. You start not being able to rationalize. That's basically like, you know, anxiety is having a lot of irrational thoughts and not being able to calm yourself. You're thinking, this person doesn't like me, that person doesn't like me, I'm going to fail at this. So a lot of anxious thoughts tend to be things that aren't irrational, which is why they cause such anxiety. Like I can understand where you said about having the bad thoughts of self-harm and not wanting to be here anymore. That's something that I get quite a lot. I will impulsively snap into the only way that I can see the current anxiety ending is for everything to end, like my life to end. So it doesn't always mean necessarily that I don't want to be here. It can just basically kind of mean that actually I want things to stop. Not that I want to cease to exist, but at that present moment, I haven't got the ability to stop long enough and think and consider this long enough to put that in any other way. It's such a knee-jerk kind of reaction to that. It's an instant kind of boom, like the only solution is this. And that's difficult. It's difficult to deal with when it's yourself, but then also when you're sharing that with other people, because they're going to take that very literally and seriously, because how else can you take that? So it can mean that they start then having real fears about you, and it's not that you don't mean it, because when I say it, that I, within like every ounce of myself, that's literally what I feel. But when you allow that time to pause and evaluate that, actually it isn't what I truly want. So there's a difference, like in that impulse of that moment, without having the ability to control my inhibition, I'm very focused, that is exactly what I want, but actually it's not. So that there's a danger in there, and it's quite risky for people like who are more vulnerable in these ways, because you can make very impulsive decisions based on stuff that isn't really what you truly want and feel, because you're having a knee-jerk reaction. So it's a hard thing to kind of combat. So for people that have those kind of difficulties, one of like a really good thing to try and do would be to have a visual prompt somewhere that kind of would say, if you have these feelings, like what you need to do now is stop. You need to pause, and you need to allow yourself at least this much time to let things flow before you act on this, because it could be false. So that's quite important, because you don't want to be doing stuff that's going to put you at risk and put you at harm just because you're being impulsive. So I think that's quite an important thing to share, really, is that to safeguard yourself, that's something that can help, is having something that's going to remind you to wait. If your brain can't make the pause for you, you have to do something that's going to remind you that you need to do it. So that's where like something like a visual prompt can be quite useful.
Thanks, Jo. How much we're sort of running out of time now. I think we're going to go over. I hope that's okay with everybody. How much longer do you think, Jo, do you need? And then we'll have some questions right at the end.
There's another about like 20-25 minutes.
Okay, if that's okay with everybody, we'll carry on, and then we'll have about 10 minutes of questions at the end. Thanks, Jo.
Yeah. I'm trying to like give it like the time it needs and deserves, really, because there's quite a lot of stuff we're going over here. So
I totally agree. You carry on. It's brilliant stuff. Thank you.
So now I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about like having both, like, and some of the conflicts that can happen within your brain because of having this dual diagnosis and both conditions. So My personal experience of this is that it often feels like being in a constant battle. To me, it can be like, you know, the autism side of my brain is saying I need to do it like this, and the ADHD side of my brain is coming in and going, well, I want to do all these different things, this is boring. So it's kind of almost like having like two kids in your head that are fighting all the time. You're trying to listen to one and sort out one's problems, but then the other one's coming up with something. So you're constantly having to deal with these two. I almost imagine them as almost like two entities inside me of the ways I want to do things. Sometimes they come together and they work really well, and other times they're just like basically like trying to see who can come up with the best idea and just fighting against each other for supremacy. It's that, you know, if you've got more than one child and you're trying to like all choose like a film to go and watch, one might have one idea and the other might have another idea, and you get a lot of arguing about what's going to happen. So having both things makes it difficult to like filter out external stimuli. So it can mean that how this can affect you can mean with autism, certain things can grab your attention and keep your interest. So things like on your special interests, you can allow yourself to be quite focused on those things. With ADHD attention, you're tending to jump around from one thing to another, and it's hard to keep concentration and focus. It's not so much that you like can't pay attention to things, it's just that you're trying to pay attention to everything, and that's the issue. So having both can cause a lot of frustration, because if you're autistic and you want to be able to focus on that one thing that you like a lot and you can't, it can mean that you are finding it, you know, like your ADHD is meaning that you're jumping from thing to thing. It can start to mean that you are struggling with that stuff. So ADHD can also cause a lot of social problems in remembering things and in concentrating. So autism already causes issues socially. So ADHD just adds another layer to that, especially in like learning your skills to cope with things socially. So with ADHD, some of the issues you can have with your social stuff will be remembering things that people are saying, listening to people, being able to remember people's names, just, you know, things that you kind of, in a social interaction, you try and remember stuff about people so you know what to talk about. With ADHD, you struggle with that. So if you're autistic and you're being taught social skills, for example, and you want to use those, you might find that when you come to use those, you forget them or you haven't retained them because of having ADHD and your issues with your working memory. So you have it adds another layer to those issues. When something can't happen or when something changes, you know, like typically that's difficult for people with autism. It's hard to understand why that's changing. It's hard to reconfigure your day. But having ADHD also makes it harder to retain the information about the change. So you're finding that you're having to repeat constant explanations of why it's changed because it's harder to keep that in mind that it has changed. Autism is kind of not always knowing how to do something or how to approach something, and wanting to approach things in a very specific way. Whereas with ADHD, it's that thing where you're not knowing if you're going to be able to use the skills that you have to do it. So there's an element of uncertainty added to life. And that's hugely frustrating, especially when you have autism too, because as you know, a lot of people with autism want familiarity, they want routine, they don't want uncertainty. Uncertainty is stressful and scary. So having ADHD can just add that like more difficulty to that, in the sense that you're not knowing what you're going to be able to do. Autism I find more predictable in terms of your patterns of behaviour. So I always find that if I was just autistic, I think things would be a lot easier. It's the ADHD I tend to have a lot more struggles with. with autism, you want and you crave structure, even if they don't admit it, they do, and familiarity. So with ADHD, you need it, but you don't necessarily want it. You want to be able to go off on a free reign of doing whatever the hell you want. So ADHD is more unpredictable in that sense, and that's more difficult, but more so when you're autistic and you expect things in your day to be a certain way, and they don't go a certain way. So this is stuff such as not being able to focus on your planned activities. So if I've got something planned and then suddenly I can't do it because of something to do with my ADHD, it makes me really pissed off, and it makes me struggle quite a lot, because in my head I'm supposed to be doing this, but my brain's not letting me do it. So it also means stuff like time judgment, which can screw up your planning. If you can't judge time, you tend to try and plan too much or too little. That can screw up your planned schedule. Things done, you want things to be done in ADHD time, which is the now or not now, or in autism time, which is being meticulous and thorough. So with ADHD, you tend to have two times. There's now and there's not now. It's either happening now or it's not happening at all. You want it completed now, or it's never going to be completed. With autism, you probably are more thorough, meticulous, and can't take your time with things. ADHD is an attempt to just do enough. So on that basis, you can see that just doing enough, just scraping by, is not going to wash with autism of wanting to have it all exact and done properly. So you can have a lot of conflict within this, and this is where a lot of the problems I have are in this which side wins. So it can cause a lot of anger and frustration at things not being just so, and the uncertainty will add to the anxiety and stress. So if my ADHD side of things wins out, I've done just enough on something, I'll often get really angry and really pissed off because it's not good. And so what I will then just reject and just get quite angry about, because it's not how I want it to be. But then I'll be frustrated at having to do it all again because I want it to be there now. So there's this constant kind of conflict going on with that. It can be exhausting. You can have impulsive ideas to do things. One of my things was decorating. So I had this idea that I was going to repair some of the cracks in the walls in one room. This then led on to the autism thing being like, okay, well, if we're going to do that, we might as well do like the whole house and do it properly, kind of thing. So then the ADHD took over, and it went from repairing cracks in one room to in the cracks across the whole house, to then let's redecorate this room because there's quite a lot of things that need doing, to then we might as well redecorate the whole house and do the garden all at the same time. And it led to like there being complete chaos within my environment, and like my autism couldn't cope with that because it was just too much. It meant that I was flitting between these activities, and the house was just like a work site. So I became very unsettled and then didn't finish it all. So I'm still decorating all of the house. So yeah, you've got this battle between wanting it done now or wanting it done perfectly. And basically you're more likely to experience a lot more frustrations whatever you do, whether you're just now wins or whether you're meticulous, thorough, attention to detail wins. But I think having both in that terms, I can do things quite quickly or I can do things very, very well. So I've got like a kind of a choice and options between how I do things, which is also quite a bit of a benefit sometimes. The other thing is that I always have to be occupied, like my brain always has to be occupied with something. My relaxation is usually active, so my friends and the carers and stuff will be like, why don't you just chill out, just have a chill? And I'm like, well, I can't, I need to be doing this. And they'll be like, okay, so why are you doing this task for? You can relax. And I'll be like, well, actually this task is my relax, and this is what I find relaxes and calms me, and I enjoy doing this. So this like kind of thing is important, and I have to have a lot of variation between my activities. I have to vary between physical and mental activities in the day so that I'm able to regulate and calm myself. The variation is key to keeping my attention. When I'm stressed, I want things to be all the same though, so that can be hard. My psychologist basically says to me that what applies to me is not the devil makes work for idle hands, but the devil makes work for idle brains. So if my brain is not occupied, I'll end up ruminating quite a lot, and I can get quite ill from that, because I'll end up seeing what I've not done, where I'm not achieving what I've not got to. So it can be hard to be occupied all the time when you're struggling to plan as well. So that sets you up to kind of almost not fail, but like, you know, have a lot of difficulties. So that's the end about the stuff to do with like conflict and stuff. And I'm going to just move straight on to medication and strategies so that we can get through it. So the stuff about medication that I'm talking about is not any type of advice at all about what medications you should take, or telling you, like, you know, it shouldn't be substituted for any professional advice. It's important to listen to your doctors about that. I'm literally just going to be telling you about what I've learned about medications and what I've used and how I've experienced that. So I take stimulant medications. The first ones that I tried were Concerta and Adhd, which is a they're both a brand of methylphenidate. So this worked quite well for me, like to start with, and it actually for me it was quite life-changing starting the medication. It made that I was able to do a lot more things. However, I started with Concerta, and then due to funding issues, my local trust changed the medication over to Adhd, which was cheaper. So you think, well, actually that's just going to be the same medication, it's got the same stuff in it, but actually there's differences in the release mechanisms of those medications, because the release mechanism for Concerta is patented. So whereas you can have the same ingredients in different medications, you can't have the same release mechanism. So that's actually quite important, because when you have an extended release medication, how it's then being released into your bloodstream and at what rates can affect how long it stays in your system and how long it's effective for, and at what levels it's most effective. So changing from Concerta to Adhd meant that I felt like my medication didn't last as long for me, and I had to start using a top-up medication in the evenings so that it saw me through the day. Recently, I've started to change over to Elvans, which is another stimulant, and this came about when I changed psychiatrist, and he looked at some of the issues I've been having and said, well, actually a lot of people who find some benefit from the methylphenidate but not completely often find that the Elvans can be more effective in some of the things that aren't working. So he kind of had decided that, based on some of the feedback I was given, that while my medication was helping a bit, it wasn't being as effective as it could be, and that it'd be worth actually trying this to see if that could help with other things. I knew that in the past that with my methylphenidate, when I'd gone up on doses, it could literally eliminate 70% of my anxiety, because it was meaning I was able to concentrate and get on with more. So I agreed to kind of change, because I thought like it'd be worth to see it if it can eliminate a lot more of my other anxieties. So we decided to do it in a way, like, we thought, how am I going to change from one to the other? I find it hard to transition. I find it difficult with internal changes in changes in how I feel. So we've gone through changing by reducing one stimulant at the same time as increasing another, which isn't how it's usually done, but it's minimising the internal effect on me. I've also needed to have like a visual explanation about my medication change, about why I'm doing it, what I know about it, what I can expect, because if I don't have this, I forget how I felt before. So that means then that I can start a medication and go, right, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore because I feel different and it's making me anxious. So just having that visual means that in those times where I'm getting stressed, I've got something I can refer to and use to help me calm myself down. So other than stimulants, there's also non-stimulant medication. So stimulant medication tends to work for a specific period and then it wears off. So it's kind of like if you have a headache and you take a paracetamol, it works for those 4 hours and then it wears off and then you have to take another one. With stimulant medication, the medication will start in the morning and wear off by the end of the night. With the non-stimulant medication, it tends to build up in your system like antidepressants would do. So you might not realise the effects of that for about 6 weeks. I think sometimes for autistic people, non-stimulants might be a good thing in the sense of having a more consistent state of internal feelings. So you're not having the period where you haven't had it and you're changing into having it and it wears off. It's more consistent in that way. But I chose stimulants because I was impatient. I couldn't wait for the effect because things were so difficult. I needed to have what help I could have now. And with stimulants, you kind of know quite quickly if they work or not. So I figured I'd try the stimulant first, and if it worked, great. If it didn't, I could try a non-stimulant. So it's important if you're going to go down the line of medication, you've got a realistic expectation of it. And it's important to kind of not think that medication, taking this one pill, is going to solve your ADHD, because it isn't. It won't fix it all, and it can't, and it can level it like slightly. It can make things more achievable, but it's not going to cure all of the issues. And having an expectation of what to expect from it, what it's going to be like, will also help you to determine whether it's working or not. Because if you're not sure what it's going to do, how can you know if it's working or not? So the other thing about like the expectations of medications and how it can change what you can do and how it can be helpful and stuff, is that having medications will increase the efficacy of coping strategies. So it's giving you a better chance to be successful at employing like the coping strategies that you might need. And I think as well, sometimes it's important to have that medication in place to enable you to use those strategies effectively. And without them, it can be hard to stick to things. I always know when I've not had my medication. Like the other day, I think at the start I was saying that I forgot them one day and I didn't realise, and even when I was jumping around pretending to be a cat and then singing and stuff, I didn't realise until I got angry about what I couldn't do, and then it was all too late. So yeah, like the medication really, really does help me. And it's made a really, really huge difference to my life, and being able to see that is a good thing. So whereas medication can do so much, it's also important to have strategies. So I use quite a lot of strategies in day-to-day life, and there are a lot of different strategies that you can use. A good place to find strategies and to find more resources and tools is through Adhd. So it's like attitude but with 2 Ds instead of 2 Ts. They have a Facebook page. It's a magazine. They have a Facebook page and they post different articles. You can sign up to a newsletter, and I think there's an app as well. But basically within this you get a lot of strategies for different specific things, like strategies for self management, strategies for prioritizing, and they're really good at suggesting different tools and apps and things you can use. So
what was the name of that again, so I can type it into the chat?
Adhd. So it's attitude but with 2 T's and 2 D's to the T's.
Lovely. And is that .com?
There's a I usually go through a Facebook page on it, but there's probably a website as well. So we just type it in Google
for the word.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
I use that a lot, like in looking for different strategies and things, and you can get stuck on it, but it's really quite helpful. And they have like some downloadable resources and stuff on there too. So I use a lot of timers and stuff. Like the timers are more a way of, they're not just a way of keeping track of time, but also of motivating. So it's like I use like the Pomodoro method, where you have 20 minutes or something of concentrating, and then you're going to get a 10-minute break, and then you have, so it's giving you a short time of focus, but it's meaning that you are like motivating yourself to do it because you've got a short time. So how that helps me is that, like, in my day-to-day routine now, I have blocks of time where I have activities and then I have sensory breaks. So using this is quite helpful for me, because it means that I can have like time where I know that this is happening, and then I've got time just to chill. It's making me have those breaks as well, because otherwise I can get very stuck in like hyper focus. I use a lot of prompts, visual, auditory, and reminders. So I'll have a lot of visual prompts stuck up everywhere. Move my camera. So above my desk, I have all of these kind of things. So I've got like things like if plans change, like I can, if something's, it's okay, if I can look at something else in my planner and choose a different task. I have prompts for why am I stressed, and what am I this, is it that, and then on the back I've got strategies and things I can use, tips for productivity, attention if you're stressed, stop and use your sensory stuff. I've got like a coronavirus visual going on as well, like sort of excelling. These are all things that I've worked on with my psychologist and stuff, and this thing was quite important with balance, sort of that kind of stuff. So I've got a lot of things there to like always prompt me and stuff. I also like use a lot of like the Google speakers and stuff like that. So I had to turn off my Google because Anna was activating it.
The mic and camera are back on.
Like I have like my Google speakers and stuff. No, I have set up routines and stuff, so it will tell me to go to bed. So if I just go, hey Google, bedtime routine.
Joe, it's time to stop what you are doing, turn things off and start your bedtime routine. Don't forget to update your meal planner and get things ready for tomorrow. Make sure you set your alarm and take your medication.
So I have like that going on with my Google every night at a certain time. It does that, and then it broadcasts it throughout the house just in case I'm not in the room where that alert would go off. So it's reminding me to do the things I need to do. I also have set up routines where if I say to the Google, I'm stressed, because if I'm living on my own, I might not have people there to help me. So if I say, hey Google, I'm stressed.
It is okay to feel stressed. This feeling will pass. You will be okay. Do you need to take your PRN medication? Where is your 5-point scale? Check where you are on here and what you should do.
Hey Google, stop. It then goes on to count backwards from 100.
No problem.
Because I like the count in it. It helps me calm. So I have stuff like that like set up, and I have like different prompts within it, so that if I feel certain ways, I can get that like feedback from stuff. So I'm probably likely to tell Google I'm pissed off or something. So it will then come back with stuff that I've pre-programmed to remind myself when my amygdala has been hijacked and I'm sort of not in my rational thinking brain, that can then remind me of those rational things and of my strategies. So they're quite important things that I have for me in place at home. So there's a combination of things that are time routines, and there's a combination of things that are done on like when I give it the prompt. I have it to remind me to get ready for things and to go out, and to remind me if I've got all the things I need when I leave. So it's quite useful in that sense. I also tend to do things like make tasks more portable. So I'll have like a folder with a task breakdown sheet on the front, and I'll write on it, and all the stuff in the task that I need for the task is in that folder. So then I can transport it around to wherever I'm doing my work. And it makes it easy to access, and I've got the steps listed already. So one of the things with tasks that I find is that it can be very hard to break them down and to know where to start, and because they seem overwhelming, I avoid them. So if I break them down first, that helps a lot. There's also things I like to do, like preparing in advance, and this isn't just preparing the things that I need in advance, it's also from the autism side, it's making those plans of events in advance so that I know what to expect. So I've expanded that from just being ADHD and preparing the things you need to also being in preparing my expectations and what I need to do and with who. So I'll do things like in advance, I'll get like my clothes ready for the next day, even if, say, I'm not going anywhere. If I'm planning to do DIY and decorating, I'll get up and get dressed, and I'll find I've dressed myself in my nice clothes that I don't want to get wrecked. So then what happens then is that rather than getting changed to do the activity, I either don't do the activity or I do the activity in my nice clothes and ruin them. So having like my DIY clothes out ready before I get up means that I'll put those straight on rather than having to go, oh, for God's sake, I've got to get changed and I can't be bothered to do it. A lot of the things with ADHD I like things like eliminating the steps in tasks. So I went through a phase where I was only drinking like fizzy drinks because they were easy to just get out of the fridge. So my solution to that was to fill a jug up with like juice and put that in the fridge. So it was just as easy to get the juice as it was to get the fizzy drinks. So it cut the steps down of having to get everything out, make it all and put water in and stuff. It was a lot quicker. I've done the same with cereal. I've got like a cereal dispenser so that I don't have to go and get the cereal box out and do all the steps to put it all together. And then like means that I'll eat breakfast instead of avoiding it. I have tools to keep track of things. Keeping track of things is quite important. Friendship between movement and physical activity, I need that to regulate. I make things a competition so that it makes me motivated to do it. It gives me an onus to go on. Rotating things, keeping it novel. A lot of assistant technology things can help. The smartphones are very, very useful, but it's also about finding what works for you. So I use a combination of things on smartphones and notepads. Like I said at the start, like psychoeducation is very, very important. Knowing how you work can help you find solutions, and acceptance and patience of your difficulties and that kind of stuff, and enroll in support of the people that support you. So like I was going to talk about some of the benefits, but I don't think there's any time left to do that. And
that's been amazing, Jo. I think this is obviously going to have to be a two-parter, because we've had some fantastic reviews from people and there's some questions and things, and I think you've just chucked so much information that even I couldn't keep up with writing the notes and whatever. So we might have to have a chat about how we can pass this information on to everybody. So obviously they'll have the recording, but we'll try and make it easier by giving them a list of, say, the things that you do, so that they can so people can try that out. But it's been absolutely fantastic. I think we've had some amazing reviews. I think we'll wind it down, but I know that Bobby's been waiting really patiently to have a quick chat with you. So if we finish off with Bobby, and then what we'll do is we'll arrange another time to do some more stuff with you. So Bobby, are you able to unmute? I've just unmuted you.
Yeah. Hello, Jo.
how you doing?
I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, like I remembered like being at school, and when I was in year 7, like none of the teachers like understood me or anything, and I felt like I was getting bullied by the staff more than the students, and I was diagnosed at the end of year 7 because I just couldn't cope with the school anymore. It was a mainstream school. And then when I got a diagnosis, I went to a special needs school, which I felt like, what am I doing here? Because it was more people with visits more than mild people with autism, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then I go to a group called Autism Matters, which is a great group as well. And I've just released a book about autism and about my autism as well, and my journey with autism, and I used to have mental health, like I still do a bit, and because of relationships, because I always think, is it me? You know, like, have I done something wrong? And I used to go to counselling, and the only way of helping me was writing my own songs and releasing them with the help of Janice South guy, Carl Pepperton, and like, I just feel like I'm okay now, but then like at the minute I'm a bit like, oh, like with the whole corona, like just your plans just change and you don't feel the same. And
yeah, it's hard. I've found with the coronavirus situation that I've kind of had to just alter my perspective of it. So rather than like be trying to be like normal, I've gone, right, okay, well, this is a completely different situation. I need to kind of create a different normal, stop like my expectations of trying to keep things the same and like focus on things that I can do. So I've kind of used it as an opportunity to do different things and to spend more time on the things that I enjoy doing. So you could spend more time with your music and stuff, because like creative pursuits are really good for dealing with things. Especially it helps you with processing all those emotions and stuff and letting them out.
That's what I'm doing now. I'm doing like another book, and like I'm just keep on like writing songs, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Busy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you, Joe. That was unbelievable. That was just so much information, and it was. I hope you enjoyed doing it as well, because it was really well done. I was really impressed.
It was like a kind of a last minute, like I couldn't, in true ADHD style, I couldn't focus on like sort of the day before, and then so yeah, I was up till 3 a.m. sort of preparing.
Oh, wow. Well, you did it. You smashed it. It was excellent, and we've had some fantastic comments from people. Everybody's taken so much away from what you've been talking about today. So thank you so much. So as I was saying, we will definitely organise another one, and if you can condense some of this into some sort of a list that we can give out with the recording. The recording will go out next week because it's going to take me time to render it and sort of obviously put a few extra bits and pieces on it, but you will definitely get it next week. So thank you, Joe. Anna, I've just
I think I'll try and put some of the strategies and things either into like a video blog thing, like, or some kind of blog or something, to share some of the strategies in more detail, so they can be more bite-sized and stuff, so we could maybe put those on either YouTube or through the website.
Perfect.
I was thinking about like future like presentations I could do around like behaviour as communication and sensory strategies and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, definitely all needed. I mean, Tamara is saying, thank you so much. Had some light bulb moments from this. A blog would be great. So that's amazing. And Kim's enjoying it as well. So loads of people, Cheryl, they're all saying how much they've enjoyed this. So it's been extremely useful. Holly as well. So it's fantastic. Thank you, Joe. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us. We have another workshop that's coming up with Paul Isaac and it's going to be on autism and exposure. So that's going to be on May the 7th at 10:30, same time. We're going to try and stick to Thursdays when we do our workshops or webinars. But Joe, you know, it was really lovely. Your mum and dad were watching you, and I don't know if you saw the comments from them saying that they were really proud of you, and so they should be, because obviously I've known you for a long time now, and I've known the ups and downs, and you're in such a good place now, and you look so well, and I'm so proud to have you as one of our ambassadors. So thank you again for sharing, and thank you to Oscar in the background. He's been very good today. So you need to give him an extra treat.
At one point he started crying and it was distracting me, and then he started trying to lick me and I was like, get off.
Thank you again. But I just want to also remind people that I'm still doing Women's Radio Station. My guest this week is Chris Wilde, who grew up within the care system, and he has written a book called Damaged. So please listen to Chris. He's fantastic. So that's 1 till 2 every day on Women's Radio Station. And next week, my guest is Sarah Bell, who is from Autism ACT, and she's an outreach support teacher. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay strong, and it's just one day at a time.
Thank you.